Released. My Tongue Will Speak Visions. Written by Prince Trisket. Read for you by Gemini Wishes. Chapter 4. Summary. First contact is made between the living and the dead. It doesn't quite go to plan. If I destroy you, what business is it of yours? Lusixian, the Dark Forest. T-minus 1 week, 2 days, 55 seconds. When the last petal had fallen from the lotus, a 1-hour timer was initiated. The eye no longer turned. Instead, it stayed fixed and watching. The green of its iris bled slowly away to white. Then, for the first time in days, the humming stopped. It felt like bliss. For one glorious, quiet instant. Red Robin felt as if he were a puppet whose strings were cut. He dedicated so much effort without thinking to maintaining himself against that strung-out neuropathic vibration that, if not for his training, he'd have sagged to his knees without it. Around him, multiple people did collapse. The entire diplomatic array erupted into chatter, and medical personnel were deployed to check on the collapsed people. But Red imagined that they were fine. They weren't harmed. Then that quiet instant passed and was replaced with anticipation. Red stood still as a held breath and watched the monolith. Everyone did. The lights flickered, once, and then the air bent. It was like in his dream. First, there was a fault line that extended, not across a screen, but from the monolith outward, like hair-thin spokes of a wheel. And then the city shifted. There was no tremor, no sounds of destruction or tectonic grinding as the horizon moved. There was no force at all, as far as the body was concerned. No wind, no heat. It was as if space itself curved. It dragged them forward, and the ground and tents and equipment and platforms with them, until they were within the monolith's perimeter of interference. What had been the perimeter, which didn't seem to render them catatonic the instant they passed into it, and under the monolith, where there hovered a circular, flat ring of a platform. Adjacent to them, familiar from their camera feeds and communications, was the UN team. Where there had once been trees and walkways hemming the reservoir, there was instead a flat bunk of urban tea, a strip of concrete and marble plaza, rows of flags flapping in the wind that Gotham didn't feel. The General Assembly building was behind them, reflecting and bright in the New York night. Opposite them both, the space seemingly divided into thirds, there was the Capitol Rotunda and the U.S. delegation. Red registered the bitter thought that the U.S. federal government wouldn't get to choose to be separate from them after all. There were the fault lines, the visible demarcation beyond which Gotham ended and New York began, as did D.C. There was no transition. There was no projection. They were here. And yet, there was just one monolith. 3 identical structures, 4 really, that the data suggested were intersecting their reality from a high-dimensional one. All the monoliths are the same structure. Red Robin was pleasantly surprised to find that comms still worked. That suggested that they hadn't been actually displaced, that the space they occupied had simply been rearranged to, create one unified meeting space? Others were shifting, looking around wide-eyed. Behind them, Tim could hear the security personnel already reining in the media chatter.
"What the hell just happened?"
Batman's voice over comms.
"I'm not sure,"
Oracle responded.
"From camera perspectives outside the park, nothing has changed. From cameras within your perimeter, however, I can see underneath the monolith and to the other 2 delegation sites."
That aligns with our perspective here, Tim said. The entities responsible seem to have curved space-time, or folded it somehow, to create one space in which first contact can occur. Comms exploded with confused, alarmed chatter until Batman broke in.
"Keep quiet on comms. The situation is still ongoing."
The monolith, which had until this moment been a distant, looming figure, now hung more or less directly overhead. Red wasn't sure he'd ever felt quite so small. The air felt heavy and choking. It wasn't done, however. The ring, which was now perhaps 15 or so yards away, and was itself about 20 in diameter, unfolded in a way that made Tim's brain hurt to watch. He was tempted to pinch himself, as if he were dreaming again. The geometry of how the shape broke apart, expanded and then shifted, was absolutely non-Euclidean.
"These alien ghosts sure know how to put on a show,"
Wally said, dry over comms. Tim wondered if this sort of thing was less impressive when one took enough trips through the time stream itself. The ring now formed a platform not unlike their own, except it was tiered. At its apex were 3 seats, their backs to each other and facing humanity's delegation. A ring of figures appeared in the lowest tier of the platform. Those had to be aliens. Or, Tim wasn't sure. They looked like hovering, cloaked eyeballs. They were bloodshot, and their irises were bright green, just as the ones in the Lotus had been. All around, people braced. The entire unified sight fell into deep silence. The only hum left was the hum of machinery. One of the eyes withdrew from within the folds of its cloak a scroll, and then spoke.
"Witness and record."
The voice, and it was a voice, not injected subconscious meaning or psionic interference, despite the lack of a mouth, was high and nasal. It spoke with an arch accent that Tim might call posh. It wouldn't be out of place in Bristol.
"Witness and record,"
it said again.
"The Council of Observance greets you, delegation of this earth. You one of many, you Council of the Living."
It stopped, and the quiet turned expectant. Tim realized they were expecting a response. He wasn't the only one, luckily. "We greet you as well, Council of Observance," Troya spoke from the head of the UN delegation. "We have summoned our council, as you requested."
"Your council is divided, daughter of Themyscira,"
the eyeball noted.
"Your disunity is seen."
Two other eyes spoke in unison.
"What is seen is recorded."
Batman approached the head of the platform and spoke into the microphone there.
"You seem to have had no issue rectifying this."
A dozen or so eyes turned to him and said nothing. The one with the scroll returned his gaze to it.
"The Council of Observance greets you on behalf of the Council of Ancients,"
he began in a chanting, projected tone. On comms, Constantine swore.
"They who illuminate the farthest reaches of encompassing reality. Witness their arrival."
Just as the eyeballs, observance, had. Suddenly the middle and upper tier of the platform were occupied. The upper tier housed 3 seats. Thrones, Tim thought. These figures were not eyeballs. What they were was varied and strange. One of the 3 thrones was empty.
"Introducing,"
the speaking observant continued,
"Nocturne, Ancient of Sleep, Gatekeeper of the Dreaming."
The figure inclined its head, pale and mask-like, with deep-set crimson eyes and framed by elegantly curled purple horns. Its body was a long, slender silhouette, as encompassingly black as anything Tim had ever seen, and studded with innumerable bright white stars.
"Frostbite, Ancient of Guardians, Spirit of the Winter Solstice, Chief Healer to the Realms."
Frostbite was among the more alarming figures, 10 feet tall or more, a sloping animal silhouette with an arm made of ice. His shoulders were draped with a blue cloak and his waist wrapped. From his skull extended broken horns of ice, and his eyes were a piercing, reflective yellow.
"Dorothea, Ancient of Keeps, Bearer of the Drake, Queen of fallen Europa."
Next to most of her fellow council members, Dorothea did not cut an imposing form. She was a slight woman in a very fine, well-fitted gown with deep bell sleeves and rippling, shifting embroidery. Her eyes were crimson and reptilian, her hair a bound ponytail, fair like straw. She wore a gold pendant and crown, and her gaze swept shrewd over those assembled.
"Pandora, Ancient of Trials, Arms Master to the Realms, Guardian of the Monsters' Labyrinth, and Ruler of the Dusk Acropolis."
Tim's eyes widened at the expanding lists of titles, and his gaze darted to Troya at her podium, and then back to the warrior ghost who was, evidently, Pandora. She was enormous and regal, four-armed and white-blue marble skinned, a spear held in one hand. She wore an elaborate golden breastplate over a black peplos. She was poised, not unlike Dorothea, who stood at her elbow and exchanged a glance with her.
The Fright Knight, ancient of subjugation, right hand of the crown, spirit of Halloween, commander of the yoked horde, and knight grand cross to the infinite realms.
Those titles were altogether the most concerning. Among all the Council of Ancients, the Fright Knight was the only one to move when introduced. He stepped off of his tier and drew a blade, planting its tip in thin air at his floating feet and looking around the assembled. He was, at a glance, a possessed suit of armor, deep midnight black reminiscent of Nocturne, a spiked helmet and a burning purple crista. Set inside the helmet's face guard was a dark void and two glowing, angular green eyes. A chill ran down Tim's spine. After an evaluating moment, the spirit of Halloween nodded once to the observant and stepped back into place. The eyeball ghost in question waited for him to do so, and then, as smoothly as if he hadn't been interrupted at all, continued.
And Clockwork, ancient of time, left hand of the crown, arbiter of the realms, keeper of the time stream, the world fulcrum, and the eclipsing eventuality.
What? Clockwork was difficult to perceive in enough detail to describe. He was a shape, or a suggestion of a shape, that Tim's mind struggled to clarify into meaning. He was, in the space of one heartbeat, an elderly man hunched deep in his own cloak. In the next, a child with bright, solemn eyes. An infant swaddled in shadow. A young man with a blade at his hip. Tim never saw the change happen. There was no transition to watch. There was only the knowledge, arriving fully formed. The Clockwork had always been the form he now wore, even if he had been something else a moment ago. Shifting as he was, his eyes remained a deep, smoldering red. His skin was tinged blue, and a hooked black scar framed one side of his face. His chest cavity was exposed, and inside the cage of it were turning gears. Were these ghosts gods? Did this Clockwork control the time stream? Had the Flashes ever encountered him? Tim wanted to look back at Wally, but he was transfixed by the arrayed power before him. There was new terminology here, but also enough context that he thought he could guess at what an ancient was. These were, perhaps, among the most old and powerful ghosts from whatever their host reality was. The infinite realms. Tim burned with questions. And yet, the two figures at the top of the structure hadn't yet been named. Who stood over time?
At the pinnacle of the end,
The observant continued,
presiding over the Council of Ancients and the Council of Observance, bearers of the tripartite crown of essence.
Fuck.
Princess Danielle, the Wraith, emergent of freedom, spirit of mirrors, the wandering soul, and favored of the speed force.
Danielle looked young, perhaps younger than Damien. She wore a form-fitting black bodysuit and modular white armor, gauntlets, boots, belt, and miscellaneous plating that allowed for mobility. Hooked over one shoulder was a sheer white veil trimmed in bright green embroidery. Ceremonial, perhaps. Her hair was so white as to look shimmery and translucent, and her eyes were that same brilliant green. Over her left brow was perched what Tim now understood to be part of a crown. It was a delicate silver half-moon, wreathed by green flame that licked at her head without burning. Chains hung from the crown, thin ones that flowed over the shoulder opposite her cloak. They, too, glowed with low green fire. She met Tim's eyes just for an instant, and then her gaze passed over him. She looked angry.
Prince Dante, The shade, emergent of sacrifice, spirit of vengeance, the cruel justice, and bearer of the ring of rage.
Perhaps it was premature to call Danielle angry. When Dante's gaze swept over the assembled, Tim was fully unable to suppress the instinct to take a step back. That sensation of animal fear returned. Deep breath. Tim forced himself to settle. Dante resembled Danielle a good deal. They must have been siblings. He was much taller, probably older, and broader. Tim was willing to bet he had every inch of height and pound of muscle that Bruce or Clark had, and he wore it easily. There was a confidence in him that came from being an apex predator, an assurance that the instant it occurred to him that something or someone stood in his way, he could clear his path with ease. His skin was pale green and his hair that same white, but it seemed to flow up and over his head like dancing flames. His black and white bodysuit resembled hers, but he wore no armor, only a black metal mantle that settled across his shoulders, and from it flowed a cloak of smoldering red flame. It wasn't red-orange like fire. No, it was a deep, blood-red plasma that cascaded down around him as it burned. Another fragment of the tripartite crown sat over his right brow, but it didn't match Danielle's. His was a jagged, sharp thing that looked as if its points would dig into its wearer's skull. It burned red as his cloak. The third seat was still empty. It sat between Danielle and Dante, like an open wound between them, and Tim wasn't the only one who was drawn to the missing space.
"And missing from the council,"
the observant drawled, still elegant, though all of the assembled ghosts seemed to flinch.
"Prince Daniel, the phantom, emergent of balance, the bridge between, the god with two faces, the tyrant slayer, beloved of space and—"
Enough.
A deep voice shook the entire staging ground.
I tire of this ceremony. We are here for one reason.
The interruption was Dante, who had grown more visibly harried as the accounting of Daniel's titles continued. He took a step off of his podium, and where he walked, little elliptical pools of green appeared to catch his white boots. Prince Dante strolled off of the platform, and Danielle followed him until they were more or less level with humanity's delegation. Unlike Dante, she floated.
"Yes, of course."
The observant made a sound of throat clearing, despite his continued lack of a throat or mouth.
"Prince Daniel, missing emergent of balance, was taken from us by humans of this reality. You are summoned before the High Councils to answer for this crime."
"Our brother," Danielle began, her voice reedy and high, and yet carrying across all of the assembled with surprising strength, "is missing. He is bound somewhere in your universe, on this earth. We are not here for a trial."
We are not here to beg.
Dante continued. "We are not here to negotiate."
We are here to deliver terms.
Dante stepped further away from their platform, green light holding him aloft in the space between them. He now faced the UN platform directly, while Danielle watched Gotham's delegation.
We are here to remind you that the price of imbalance is not war. It is rot and collapse.
His crown glinted, jagged and crystalline, brutal, but no less beautiful in its violence.
Daniel is lost to us, either by your action or your inaction. The circumstances are irrelevant. The living have sundered the balance in a way that can no longer be ignored. You will find him, and you will return him to us. You have 9 of your days.
Dante said, and, with a gesture, the hum returned. When it resolved in his mind, Tim found another sort of timer, this one a star chart of shifting constellations.
If he is not found,
he continued, standing by Danielle and putting a hand on her shoulder,
we will collapse this universe and everything in it, and retrieve his core from its quantum ashes.
T-minus 1 week, 1 day, 23 hours, 55 minutes, 59 seconds. Tim felt the proverbial floor fall from beneath him. Given these ghosts' evident ability to fold space, it might have been wise to check that it really hadn't. But no, it was just the sensation of breath fleeing his body and his thoughts coming to a chilled halt. There was a dawning horror within him as he considered Prince Dante's ultimatum. 9 of your days. Collapse this entire universe and everything in it. They had their timeline. The unified sight was as lost for words as he was in the moment they had to process. Someone needed to speak. The awareness of the need to de-escalate the situation that they hadn't even known of was making itself more urgent as his head cleared by degrees. And yet he didn't know what to say. Who should say it? What the tone should be, the message, the appropriate body. In the next moment, there was an outbreak of voices, from the UN delegation assembled behind Troya's podium, from the 2 platforms behind Tim, and a suspicious silence from the direction of the Capitol delegation. He looked first to Bruce, always to his mentor first. At a glance, Batman didn't look stunned, which was better than Tim imagined he looked, despite his usual grip on his composure. That being said, there were tells. The stiffness of Bruce's shoulders, the degree to which his fingers were flexed and resisting the urge to make a fist, the tight line of his expression and his singularly fixed gaze. Those were bad signs. When threatened, the bat's vision would tunnel and sharpen into a weapon that would inflict catastrophic damage first and ask questions later. It was a trait that was present in all that he had trained, and it largely served them well. When it didn't, though, it really didn't. There was a chance that Batman's paranoia would launch him beyond diplomacy altogether and straight into enacting contingencies that they didn't even know would work. If that's where Bruce was, mentally, there was a good chance that Dick wasn't far behind him. Red Robin tapped on his comm twice. Nightwing flinched. He and Batman both looked at Red. He flashed a hand sign that told them to wait, and hoped that would jar them from their first reactions enough to let them navigate the situation diplomatically. The countdown was already ticking, stars spiraling in the back of Tim's mind. Troya, luckily, also seemed to have gathered herself. She bent over the podium, gaze on the upper tier of the Ghost Delegation's platform, where Dante and Danielle had returned, her posture half deferring nod and half signal of approach. "Emergence," she began, and Tim envied the unshaken quality to her voice. "Your Royal Highnesses, you have been heard. The allegations that you bring forward are not insignificant, but I urge all present not to allow anger or fear to determine the shape of what comes next." Of the 2 emergents, Danielle was clearly the more willing to listen. Dante wasn't brushing her off, exactly, but his body language was closed and his expression unimpressed, whereas Danielle noticeably softened at some reassurance that they were heard. That was noteworthy. Tim scanned the rest of the Council of Ancients members for their reactions and found himself largely unable to read them, with only a couple exceptions. Pandora, like her princess, seemed to have softened, if in the way that one might toward a child who was behaving surprisingly well. Dorothea, next to her, had raised her brows in an expression of patient allowance. Donna continued, "It is the United Nations position that we should temper escalation with dialogue. If there is room to proceed with a conversation, then we are willing to do so in good faith and with—"
"On behalf of the United States government, I need to interrupt this exchange."
A sharp, projected voice interrupted her. The attention of the unified sight, which seemed to have largely disregarded the Capitol delegation, snapped to the new speaker. A figure had stepped to the fore of their platform, mid-40s, neatly trimmed brown hair and chiseled jaw, but not possessing much personal gravitas. His suit, pressed to perfection, was a bright white that stood out among the mostly black or navy ensembles behind him. It wasn't only his suit, either. Everything he wore looked to have been bleached and starched within an inch of its life. Tim didn't recognize him as any prominent member of the federal government or any intelligence body he knew. Comms flared active again before Oracle silenced them. When the emergent's eyes landed on him, the quality of the air around them changed. It grew hot, all at once, and charged in the way that atmosphere did before a lightning strike. The monitor of Tim's field station flared to life with new readings, but even the data couldn't draw Tim's attention from that moment.
"I address the 2 unauthorized delegations present.
The white suit continued, with an ease that might be confidence or might be pure oblivious posturing.
These entities are a classified transdimensional threat under an existing security framework. I am informing you that jurisdiction over this event, and any communication with these entities, falls under the Ghost Investigation Ward, per PL 112-190.
The GIW was here. Those encrypted transmissions. Fuck. The GIW agent, whoever they were, continued heedless of the rising alarm of all present and the incandescent rage that Tim saw brewing in Prince Dante's expression.
Furthermore, it is the GIW's stance not to engage these entities in dialogue of any kind. They are a collection of post-conscious energetic imprints. They have no genuine sentience. Do not buy into their performance of civilization.
Their what? Tim felt that the situation had swan-dived from a tense if salvageable first contact straight into a worst-case scenario. And now Wally was talking. Of course.
Hey, man. Whatever information you have about the situation, we can discuss at a later juncture. But this is not helpful.
Flash raised both hands, palm out in his usual, I'm the nice one, please don't attack way, flitting in an instant from the middle platform to the one that Red was on. His eyes tracked from the agent to Dante and then back. Red wasn't sure if the interruption was merciful or stupid. Let's dial it back a bit. He looked between the US and UN delegations, and then fleetingly at the central dais.
There's been a serious breakdown in communication. We will initiate contact as appropriate, the GIW agent bit out. You and the remaining delegations will leave this to the proper authorities and allow us to contain the phenomenon.
Contain it? Them? Were they stupid? The ghosts had just folded space itself, and they thought they could, fence them in? Electricity crackled. The unified site had to have grown hotter by at least a few degrees Celsius.
Agent, Troya interjected. According to both U.S. law and international treaties, diplomacy with non-human and extraterrestrial beings falls within the jurisdiction of the Justice League. We expect that you will... This is not a matter for diplomacy.
His tone was becoming increasingly cornered.
The GIW will not allow you costume freaks to jeopardize...
Oh no. Freaks! Flash shouted, like he just couldn't help himself, and then all three delegations erupted in noise. Dante took a step away from his throne and into midair. The air grew hotter. Danielle's former look of near-softened hope had shuddered into something that Red, despite not knowing her at all, found a little heartbreaking. All of the lights that illuminated the night dimmed, just momentarily, and then flared bright. The GIW agent continued to shout down everyone else, and the U.S. delegation was just letting him. Tim Drake was not frequently proud of his federal government. This was no exception, but it was also an imminently dangerous level of incompetence and blatant prejudice.
Silence!
As before, Dante's voice swelled abruptly to booming and quelled the mounting chaos. He took another couple steps into the air, looking with an angry swagger across all of the assembled, but his gaze landed on Troya.
This is the dialogue you request.
He scoffed and then turned to Danielle.
I knew it would be a mistake to allow humanity a chance to change their fate.
Danielle straightened, seeming to understand where he was going instantly. The humming stopped. So too, coincidentally, did Tim's heart. Or nearly so, because Tim figured that if the countdown was being removed...
Before the Council of Ancients and Council of Observance,
Dante spoke, gaze not erring from his sister, whose mouth seemed to open in wordless protest.
I move that we terminate this reality immediately and retrieve Daniel's core after.
The motion is heard,
an observant said.
I second this motion.
When the Fright Knight spoke, it was with a voice that rumbled across the site like the storming of many thousands of hoofbeats. Tim saw, briefly, a bloody battlefield and skeletal soldiers. Dorothea's voice, by contrast, was the whisper of shifting scales and the crackling of a hearth. This was always going to be a futile gesture, she said with a falling wave of one hand. There is no gold in plundered halls, and salted earth yields no blooms. The living are short-sighted, as always.
No!
Danielle shook herself from her hesitation, flying off of the dais and making a looping circuit around the council. Her expression was pleading.
Danny loves mortal kind. You know this. He will bleed for them. His heart is a font everlasting.
Tim noted the use of present tense. Not loved, not was, as if she still felt his presence with her. Privately, maybe selfishly, Tim couldn't help but wish that it were Daniel here with them rather than Dante, who didn't seem to share his siblings' love for Tim's kind.
Prince Daniel is gone,
An observant said, and its eye twitched in a gesture Tim couldn't read. He was trying to keep up with the shifting calculus of the situation and failing. What could they do? The sound of a weapon powering up drew his attention. The GIW agent was lifting a rifle, sleek chrome lined with a visibly charging green power bank.
I'm putting a stop to this, spooks.
Their third of the unified sight unfolded, and the capital delegation was gone. No matter what Balance's opinion is on the matter, we cannot let threats to our crown go unmet. Pandora spoke as if nothing had happened. Daniel will understand.
No, he won't!
Well, at least someone wasn't advocating to destroy them all. Tim spoke quietly into his comms. Batman, we have to do something. They seemed willing to listen to Troya before the GIW intervened.
They're talking about destroying our dimension, Red.
How credible is this threat?
They seem to be able to do whatever the hell they want with space itself, old man.
That was likely untrue. The demonstrations had been impressive thus far, but it clearly required some combination of magic and technology, and therefore had limitations. Mathematically, however, it didn't take all that much for a dimension to unravel. Batman seemed to have frozen, as had most of the assembled, as they realized that the conversation playing out in front of them would determine the fate and longevity of their reality. Red Robin, unsure of what exactly he was about to do, stood from his field station and approached one of the unoccupied mics. Princess Danielle seemed to notice his approach first, and her gaze drew the rest of the ghost's attention. Red resisted the urge to clear his throat, or to tug at the neck of his suit in the still mounting heat. For a terrifying, suspended moment, he struggled to speak. That primal fear had burrowed itself into the internal structure of his spine and held his motor function captive. But Tim was a bat, and the bats knew how to act side by side with their terror. Council members of the Infinite Realms. As he spoke, he chose to follow Troya's example and hoped desperately that he wasn't violating some sort of terms of address. And your Royal Highnesses, I apologize on behalf of the United States delegation for their aggression. The Ghost Investigation Ward is not recognized by any intergovernmental forum present here, and I believe I speak for all of us when I say that the threat they represented was not anticipated. I implore you to allow us to proceed with talks as Secretary General Troya asserted previously. There was a thin quiet that stretched across the unified sight and unfolded space. The Council of Ancients members seemed to settle back into their places, and the prince and princess exchanged glances. After a moment that seemed much longer, the heat receded. Dante and Danielle, for the first time, took their seats. Dante made a falling wave of one hand towards Red Robin.
Proceed, then, Red Robin of Gotham. Make the case for why we should restore our original plan and allow you to recover our brother.
Fuck. He just had to open his mouth. This was not within parameters. This was about as far outside of parameters as any of them could have anticipated. At least the bats on comm had shut up. T-minus, unknown. The unified sight had gone very quiet. Where the capital delegation had been was no longer. Instead, there was more of the bank of Robinson Park curling around the monolith to meet the view of the UN Plaza and beyond it. The absence was felt like a simultaneous relief and demonstration. It was clear that this meeting occurred only so far as the councils chose to indulge it. They could, on a whim, wind up right where they started with only a newfound sense of their own impotence for their trouble. Batman's eyes were on Red Robin. So were Troya's, and Nightwing's, and the Flash's, and everyone else's. Prince Dante's gaze, in particular, was gravitational in its pull. Red couldn't look away, even if he wanted to. Across from him, the councils had settled. They were far from at ease, but they were no longer agitated. Dante, reclined on his iteration of the throne, sat with a confident nonchalance that Tim suspected was exaggerated, sagging slightly, feet planted wide, one arm draped over the side, and head cocked at an angle. The red plasma flame of his cloak spilled around his sides and down to his feet, pooling like magma. It was a pose that might as well have been carved from marble. Danielle looked tired. She looked the kind of tired a person feels after holding hope in their cupped hands and watching it drain from between their fingers like blood. He didn't flinch. He did sort of wish that Dante had given this challenge to Troia, who had already been on the verge of convincing the council to open further dialogue. Now it was up to Tim just to gain back the ground they'd lost. "Thank you," he said, and organized his thoughts at 1,000 miles per hour as he did so. "Let me begin by summarizing the grievances that you've brought before us." It was, in terms of optics, risky to remind them in plain language of what the living had done wrong, but Tim wanted to reassure them, Danielle in particular, for reasons he wasn't sure of, that humanity was listening. "You've accused our world of abducting and holding a person named Daniel, emergent of balance and 1/3 of your crown, if I understand correctly," he began. "This is compelling in its consequence, but lacking in detail." Dante narrowed his eyes. Red saw Troia's posture grow tense, but he felt he knew what direction to take this case in. He took a deep breath and continued to plunge. "That's not a refusal. It's a recognition of scale. Whatever was done, if it was done, it wasn't acknowledged publicly or on any level of international oversight. This means either something was concealed from us, or something outside of us manipulated events." Deep breath. He wouldn't think too hard about the sort of implication he was choosing to make. "As Secretary General Troia said before, it is imperative that we recognize the importance of this allegation without allowing anger or fear to cloud our judgment. You yourselves spoke of the price of imbalance, and have mentioned that Prince Daniel, himself the emergent of balance, would prefer an alternative to the destruction of an entire reality. A reality that—" He looked with deliberate slowness across the councils, meeting their gazes and resisting the animal fear response that doing so elicited. "It bears stating, contains vast multitudes of galaxies and planets and life that cannot be considered complicit in the actions of what may be rogue agents." What may be? Tim was frighteningly uncertain that this wasn't committed without the full knowledge and authority of the United States government behind it. "We need to investigate. Thoroughly. If your claim is true, if Prince Daniel was taken or harmed by human elements, then justice will follow as is appropriate. We are, after all," he looked over his shoulder at his colleagues and then to Troia, "the Justice League. It is our sworn duty to hold the forces responsible for such crimes accountable." He let the silence settle, held it, but not long enough to give the impression that he was done. "Give us the opportunity to seek something more than appeasement or war, to find Prince Daniel and seek equitable justice." This time, when he allowed the unified sight to fall into quiet, he was done. His hands were shaking. When this was over, if their reality wasn't flattened into quantum dust, he would go home and shake apart before falling into investigative spiral like none other. Danielle looked pleased. The casual look had gone from Dante's eyes. He studied Red, expression difficult to parse. The crown fragment on his brow pulsed again, deep red like a faraway radar tower or dim emergency lighting. When Dante spoke, his voice was the most quiet it had been since his appearance. It was the low crackling of a funeral pyre in its final embers.
"Danny would like you."
Danielle inhaled, sharply enough to be heard from Tim's position, and looked at her brother. Dante didn't acknowledge her reaction, and Tim didn't answer him. Dante nodded, and the hum returned. T-minus 1 week, 1 day, 23 hours, 59 minutes, 59 seconds.
"Your last chance begins now, Living Council."
Dante stood and addressed all of them now.
9 days. Justice is measured in spilt blood. This is the last cut we who are infinite shall suffer without drawing our own blade.
Before Red Robin or Troya or anyone else could respond, the unified sight unfolded, and Tim found himself in Robinson Park, restored to its own spatial symmetry. He fell into his seat,